A few years ago, I was introduced to a guy through a mutual friend of mine. My friend told me this guy named John is planning on writing a book. She asked if I would be open to meeting John, and of course, I said, sure. After a few brief email exchanges, I should say, I got a call from this guy named John. He was traveling for business and was in my town, and he wanted to meet for coffee. Again, I said, sure. Many of you might not know it, but I have a long history in the business book industry. I actually get approached quite often by aspiring authors and very established authors as well, so I'm always curious to meet guys like John. Anyway, John and I met, we sat down for our coffee, we shared some small talk about our families. John asked me a lot of questions about my wife and her business, and of course, then we dove into a conversation about his history, his business, and his plans for writing a book. I have to say, I really liked John. I liked the way he thought about business. I liked the way he treated people. I liked the concept of the book he was planning to write. He was, quite simply, one of those people that leaves a great impression immediately. I walked away from our meeting hoping I had done my part. I was hoping I had given all the proper advice he wanted. But what I didn't expect was that John's impression on me had only just begun. His interest in my family and my wife's business and my career, it was sincere and welcomed. His interest in picking my brain to gain insights into my experience with business books was completely sincere. Yet his appreciation, just for me sitting down to take the time to share ideas, wasn't fully communicated with me until a few weeks later, when a package arrived at my door containing high-end cutlery. On one side was the logo of my company, and on the other side was the logo of my wife's company. It was a gift, a thank you for my time that I can't say enough. It made a huge impression. John Ruhlin and I have spoken a few times since that day, and today I'm honored to have him on the show as a guest to talk about a concept that I find absolutely fascinating: how to make an unforgettable impression. Please welcome to the show John Ruhlin, founder and CEO of the Ruhlin Group, and now, years later after our conversation, author of the brand new book, Giftology. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Todd, thank you so much for having me, man.
John, like I mentioned, Todd, talking to myself. You and I have had a few conversations I have had with myself. We've had a few conversations throughout the years, and you have a fantastic story about how you got into business. Before I ask you to tell that story, I want you to give the listeners a very brief overview of what the Ruhlin Group is and does.
Yeah. So the Ruhlin Group, I started 16 years ago, and I don't have to go into all the early stage stuff, but the core of Ruhlin Group is we're a gift strategy and logistics company. If I meet somebody at a suite at an NBA game or whatever else, and people say, "What do you do?" I say, "I help leaders not stuck at saying thank you," which it basically means every leader says relationships matter, but they usually drop the ball on executing thoughtful gratitude, appreciation throughout the year, whether it's with employees or clients or any key relationship. And so we coach and speak and keynote at places like Google on that topic. And then most of the time people come back to us and say, "You know what? I'm not very good at this whole consistent gratitude with my clients or what have you. Can you help me put together a plan?" And we'll put together a plan. And then oftentimes they're like, "Yeah, we're not really good at sending 1,000 gifts to 1,000 addresses with handwritten notes and whatever else." And so we do the logistics of making sure that happens.
Maybe I should have, because to put what you just said into context, maybe I should have asked you to share your story first, because like I said, it just puts so much context. I love the story, and you write about this in your book. I love the story about your friend who was selling knives for Cutco, and you write in the book, quite honestly, you were surprised he could sell anything to anybody. Tell that story of how you started with Cutco.
Yeah, so I grew up a poor farm boy, one of 6 kids milking goats every morning, and so I went into college I got straight A's. I was going to go be a doctor, because that's what you do if you get great grades, and either go be a doctor or a lawyer. And so I was looking for a way to pay for college. And my buddy, who was a ministry major at Malone, the small Christian university, high-end Christian college, and he started selling these knives. And I remember I'm like, Steve, you can't sell anything. Like, how are you selling these $1,000 knife sets? Like, when you hear the price tag of it, you're in college, it might as well be $1 million knife set.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, if Steve Wiggers can do this, like, I can at least try, even though I don't really have any sales background. And so I interned with a company, and fortunately, I was dating a girl at the time. Her dad, was an attorney, and he really, mentored me in a number of things around generosity, radical generosity, and whatever else. But by the time I was a senior in college, I was Cutco's largest international distributor, because I had figured out that it really wasn't about the knife. It was about the delivery vehicle of understanding relationships and the psychology of how to really stand out and be memorable using these kind of more subtle details about relationship building.
Well, you tell a story in the book about your girlfriend's dad and how he had asked you about paring knives, and you were like, wait, you want to send paring knives to a bunch of guys? Tell that story about how that transformed your thinking.
Yeah, so I remember going to Paul, and now Paul had bought a set of knives for, he's my girlfriend's dad, and he's, bought a set for himself and his 3 unmarried daughters. So he's like radically generous. He would find deals on things like noodles, and everybody at church, like 200 people, would end up with like a year's supply of noodles. He'd buy like a semi-load. And I'm like, Paul, that was 10, 20 G's. Like, that's a lot of noodles. And so I remember pitching him the idea. I thought maybe he would give away pocket knives to his clients. Like, they're like pallet manufacturers and home builders and insurance companies. And it's all these men that are leading, like, they're CEOs of these companies. And so I remember him being like, well, could we engrave the paring knives? And I'm sure I like had this like deer in headlights, like, you're going to give grown men, like, hey, here's a paring knife. And he's like, yeah, you want to know why? And I'm like, yeah, I'll sell you as many paring knives, Paul, as you want, but why? And he said, because I found that if you take care of the inner circle, the family, the assistant, the kids, in these business relationships, everything else seems to take care of itself. And so at that point, I realized Paul was like, he was a magician. Like, and it wasn't like a manipulative thing. It was just like, hey, I want to acknowledge the people in that person's life and appreciate them, because oftentimes they get the worst part of late nights and dinners and travel with business. And when you acknowledge those people and honor them and treat them with the same amount of respect and gratitude, it's amazing how you end up deepening the relationship with the decision maker, the CEO, the influencer. And so that's one of the reasons we became, number one out of 1.5 million Cutco distributors, was I was leveraging these relationship building principles that Paul had taught me all the way back to why he would give paring knives to people.
I love that. Paying attention to people and the people that those people care about. That does make a huge impression. I want to talk to you about your book for a second. I read it. It's great. But first, I want to play devil's advocate. Like you kind of just mentioned, there's a I don't know how to say this, a common discomfort or uneasiness that I know you get asked a lot about, because you wrote about it in the book and you've talked about it with me over the phone. It's the assumption that by gifting, people are trying to buy a relationship, or it's somehow manipulative. How do you respond to that?
Well, there's a couple of different, I guess, ways to view it. One is most of the gifts that we do, I love Rolex. I have a Rolex. Somebody, like Cutco actually gave me the Rolex. I love high-end things. But most of the gifts that we talk about are the same cost as a nice dinner out, round the golf, or ball game tickets. So they're like the $100 to $1,000 gifts is what most of our gifts are. So you're not trying to bribe anybody or manipulate anybody, but you are like, you want to give something that represents the core values of the company and the value of the relationship. And so I think most people send out trinkets and they say, oh, this is a token of our appreciation. Well, you never call that person or that friendship or that relationship a token. It wouldn't be called a token relationship. It's offensive. And so I think gifts should be an artifact, a representation. If you go into like, even the Bible, like Proverbs, they talks about like thousands of years ago, a gift ushers you into the presence of the great. And I don't think the Bible's trying to encourage you to be manipulative. I think it's trying to encourage people to pour into their relationships and treat and gift like it matters. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's a difference between a bribe and manipulation. I think, frankly, the intentions that you have when you give the gifts, if it's like you give the gift and then you're asking for referrals, or you give the gift and you're asking for a favor, people sense that. And that's like a bait and switch situation where I have people that I've been giving gifts to for years or even decades, and I think we all at a core level want to be inspired to reciprocate and acknowledged and appreciated as a human being, but nobody wants to be manipulated. Mm-hmm. And so I think that going into it with the right intentions is another big thing that that gets heavily discounted, but I think it matters.
Let's talk about your book, Giftology. Who is it for, and what will a reader take away from it? I read it, so I know what but I wanted to hear it out of your words.
Yeah. So I think it's for, at the end of the day, it's for anybody that's building relationships. We wrote it for business leaders, so sales reps, VPs of marketing, CEOs, founders. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, like, I've had people that have come to us and said, John, like, I've used this in my marriage, and using some of the principles about how to gift my wife or my husband has actually, made a difference. Like, your principles work if you're a human being and you're building relationships. But I think our core audience is B2B, anybody that's building high-level B2B relationships, and you're looking to stand out, be memorable, drive referrals, and just overall deepen the value of your relationships, and to signify and kind of remind people to stay top of mind of that you care about them. Mm-hmm. Is really the core purpose of the book and who it's for.
Let's say there's a listener who's hearing you speak today, and they're thinking about that person or people that they want to make an impression on, and wondering, well, okay, is gifting something I should try? And if so, how much do I spend?
Yeah, so I think that if it's a client, that's one thing. If it's a client, I encourage people to reinvest 5% of profits back into their clients and their core relationships, referral partners, suppliers. And I know that's something that O.C. Tanner, it's one of the things I learned. I was sitting down with, I think Rex from O.C. Tanner, and he talked about how, like, when he goes out with suppliers like Sony or Rolex, oftentimes they pick up dinner even though they're buying all the product, and they honor and treat people a certain way based upon the value of the relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think that if it's a client, and the client's, let's say, worth $10,000 in profit, like, I would reinvest up to $500 back into that relationship. On the flip side, if it's a prospect or just somebody like you that I'm sitting down with you, I hate the word picking your brain, because it basically means I want to use all of your 20, 30 years of expertise for free. Yeah. And so if I sit down with somebody for 30 minutes, I try to figure out, like, their time is probably worth a few $100s an hour, if not, in some cases, a few $1,000s an hour. And so I try to make sure that the gift acknowledges the fact that their time is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars an hour. And so I'm not going to send them a $20 gift card. I'm going to send them, like, a $200, $300 gift to say, hey, I'm not asking for anything else in return. You gave me 30 minutes of your time. I want to acknowledge that. Thank you so much. And so I think that, acknowledging time is a huge thing in relationships that most people take advantage of.
John, again, I loved your book. One last thing. There was a quote in there, and I read it over and over and over again, and I actually tried to challenge it, and I kept not being successful coming back. You wrote that one of your favorite sayings is, how you do anything is how you do everything. Explain that.
Yeah, I think that whether it's in business or relationships, I think oftentimes there's certain details of life, relationship building, people that are like, that really just doesn't matter. Like, that's good enough. What's the least I can get away with here? And I think that Paul, my mentor, and other people that I've seen be successful, is whether they're, sending a handwritten note to somebody, or whether it's their shoes being polished, or whether it's saying thank you to the waitress and acknowledging people. Like, I think everything, the little details of life are, like, really significant, and they're important. And I think that's, like, even in business, people take others golfing because they want to see how they handle, do they cheat at the golf game, because that's how they're going to handle other parts of their life. And so I think that as much as we want to compartmentalize our life and say, well, I'm good over here, but I can be this way over here, I think the most successful people, and I try to hold myself to the standard, And I'm not saying I'm perfect because I screw up, and I'm sure I compartmentalize parts of my life. And if you talk to my wife, she would have a list of things I could do better. But I do think that, striving to be congruent and consistent, and I think that's what we really try to challenge people in gifting is either do it right and do it like it matters, or don't do it at all. Because if you don't do it well and at 100%, then you're not being congruent with all the other things that you say you're first class or best in class or world class at. And so we just really try to challenge people to think that way about everything, including their gratitude and appreciation.
Well, it's interesting too, because when you think about that concept in regards to manipulation, and those of us who have been in relationships where we feel like we're being manipulated, and then other relationships where, okay, once I become your client, for example, then does the gifting stop? And you go, oh, that was just to get me in the door, and now I don't, you know what I mean? But I think companies do that all the time. It's like, and we see even ads on TV. It's for new customers, we'll give you, and you're sitting there going, I've been a subscription member for 15 years, and you don't give me any deal.
Yeah.
It's that
makes you feel cheap.
Yeah, it makes you feel cheap and cheated and manipulated. That's good stuff, John. Always a pleasure to talk to you. I wish we had a ton more time. If listeners want to know more about you, the Ruhlin Group, your brand new book, congrats on getting that out. You just launched that when?
Yeah, it just came out June 20th. It hit #1 on Amazon and customer service, and we sold out of the books faster than we were expecting. I had to reorder another round of books, and it got written up in Forbes and some other great places. So it's taken off even beyond our expectations.
Sweet. Where's the best place to find out more about you?
Yeah, so you can go, or anybody could go to giftologybook.com to kind of learn about the book. Obviously, it's available on Audible and paperback, Kindle, all the normal places on Amazon. And then we actually just created a separate site just for your listeners that if they want to know some of the top 10 worst gifts to give. I know a lot of people are thinking about gifting going into the holidays, even though that's the worst time to send a gift. Ironically enough, timing-wise, we don't recommend sending holiday gifts. But we created kind of a 10 gifts to avoid at Giftology book /Tanner if they want the PDF of just some things so they can do it on their own, or at least be thoughtful about gifting that they're doing as the year winds down. They can check that out.
Look at you. You just keep giving and giving and giving. John, thanks so much for joining us today. It's always awesome.
Thanks for having me, Todd. It's been great.